85 degrees. That was the temperature in Los Angeles the night the devil first crawled through an unlocked window. The smell of stale beer mixed with the metallic tang of copper. Before the sun rose, the city of angels would be paralyzed by a shadow that didn't just haunt the dark, it fed on it. What builds a monster that craves the blood of strangers? This is the architecture of a broken mind. The true crime story of Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker, is not just a timeline of terror. It is a blueprint of psychological decay. We are going to tear apart the foundations of a serial killer, brick by blood-stained brick. Why did a young boy mutate into a phantom who terrorized California? And more importantly, what was the hidden trigger, a secret buried in a rotting hotel room that flipped the switch from troubled youth to apex predator? We will get to that twisted revelation shortly. But to understand the predator, you have to stand in the graveyard of his childhood. Born in El Paso, Texas, Richard's early world was drenched in the suffocating heat of the desert and the sharp sting of a leather belt. His father, Julian, spoke exclusively with his fists. The house vibrated with explosive anger. You could feel the tension radiating from the floorboards, the jagged edge of impending violence hanging thick in the stale air. Richard learned early to sleep lightly, his heart hammering against his ribs in the pitch black, waiting for heavy footsteps echoing in the narrow hallway. But the real poison wasn't administered by his father, it came wrapped in horrifying war stories. Enter Cousin Mike, a Green Beret fresh from the humid, blood-soaked jungles of Vietnam. He brought the war back with him, meticulously documented in glossy Polaroid photographs. Deep in the suffocating heat of a Texas summer, Mike would show a highly impressionable Richard images of severed heads and mutilated bodies. He didn't just show them, he glorified them. He taught Richard the intricate mechanics of killing, the fragile anatomy of pain, and the absolute power a man holds when he decides if another human lives or dies. Richard absorbed it all like a dark, porous sponge. He watched, he listened, the foundation of his empathy crumbled into absolute dust. Then came the blood. Mike didn't just show pictures, he dragged Richard into the visceral reality of murder. In a single moment of paralyzing horror, Richard stood frozen as Mike pulled a gun and murdered his own wife right in front of him. The deafening crack of the gunshot, the sudden chaotic spray of crimson, the overwhelming metallic smell of fresh blood pooling on a cheap linoleum floor. This was the dark baptism. The architecture of a broken mind was now structurally sound, heavily reinforced by severe trauma and normalized violence. He quickly packed this dense darkness and dragged it across the scorching Mojave Desert directly to the neon-soaked streets of Los Angeles. L.A. was a sprawling city of sparkling facades and desperate shadows, the perfect hunting ground for a phantom. He didn't have a specific type. Men, women, children, the elderly, his weapon of choice, whatever was literally in his hand at the moment of entry. But there was a bizarre, almost ritualistic signature. He began leaving at his most brutal crime scenes, a deeply unsettling calling card that baffled seasoned detectives for months before they understood its sick meaning. Hold on to that thought, because when you realize what he was drawing on the walls, the sheer scale of his delusion becomes terrifyingly clear. By the blistering summer of 1985, Los Angeles was suffocating under a heavy blanket of absolute paranoia. Hardware stores completely sold out of deadbolts and window locks. Gun sales dramatically skyrocketed. The record-breaking heat wave was relentless, baking the asphalt soft during the day, but at night, the city locked its doors tight and prayed. Richard Ramirez wasn't just a killer, he was a ghost slipping effortlessly through the cracks of a terrified society. He actively thrived on a thick stench of raw fear. He would creep silently through partially open windows, his tall, gaunt body smelling intensely of stale sweat, dirt, and rotting teeth. He wore filthy black clothes, his dark eyes wide and fully dilated, consumed by the satanic ideology he had fully embraced. He truly believed the devil was walking beside him, intimately guiding his blade, granting him invisibility in the pitch-dark corners of the valley. He violently demanded his terrified victims swear allegiance to Satan. He wanted to thoroughly break their souls long before he broke their bodies. This is where we return to that hidden trigger, the hotel room secret. Richard lived in the squalor of the infamous Cecil Hotel in downtown LA. He was feeding his own voracious cocaine habit. The cocaine rapidly stripped away the last threads of his remaining humanity, keeping him awake for days on end, inducing violent, paranoid psychosis where the line between reality and hellish hallucination completely vanished. The drug was the high-octane gasoline poured directly onto the smoldering fire of his childhood trauma, and that baffling, bloody calling card. He purposefully left dark pentagrams, quickly drawn in bright red lipstick on inner thighs, violently smeared in thick, drying blood on bedroom walls. It wasn't merely for cheap shock value. In his rapidly deteriorating, psychotic mind, these marks were literal portals, spiritual offerings to the dark entity he deeply believed fueled his chaotic stamina. But the devil doesn't protect his loyal disciples forever. The elusive phantom finally made a critical mistake. A single, partial fingerprint carelessly left on rear view mirror of a stolen orange Toyota station wagon. In a matter of days, the faceless boogeyman had a very real name and a stark mugshot plastered across every single television screen and newspaper front page in California. The end didn't come in a sudden blaze of glory or a calculated police raid. It came in the blinding, blistering morning sun of East Los Angeles. Exhausted, disoriented, deeply paranoid, and heavily hunted, Ramirez desperately tried to steal a car. He didn't realize the vigilant residents of this tight-knit neighborhood had already seen the morning paper. They knew the gaunt face of the monster. The chase was incredibly short, brutally violent, and utterly humiliating for the self-proclaimed demon. A massive mob of angry citizens relentlessly ran him down, violently beating him with a heavy steel pipe, forcefully pinning him to the scorching pavement until the sirens wailed. He lay there, bleeding profusely, suddenly terrified of the very people he had sadistically hunted. The architecture of a broken mind collapsed completely under the heavy weight of its own reckless arrogance. He died in a sterile prison cell, leaving behind a horrifying legacy of absolute terror. We studied the architecture of a broken mind not to glorify the serial killer, but to fully understand the darkness of this true crime story before the next monster strikes.
Welcome to Crime Reveals.